My name is Charlie Hill from Lighthouse Training and Development, and I'm really excited to be talking to Graham Allcott about the new book, Kind, The Quiet Power of Kindness at Work, and something that fits brilliantly into our ethos of not only how we try and work, but also when we're working with leaders and managers across loads of different industries, lots of different roles, lots of different challenges. I think this underpins everything we do, although we may not have called it kindness. So, Graham, I'm just going to throw some questions at you, if I may. And one thing I wanted your opinion on is the culture of kindness and trust and humility and things like that. Takes a long time for people to believe in. We've had people join us and we demonstrate this on a daily basis, but sometimes it takes years for them to really trust that you're not going to suddenly turn around and catch them out or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what thoughts you have on that.
Well, I mean, trust is a really interesting thing in that it is slow on the front end to build, and then once you have it, it speeds everything up. So if you
Absolutely.
think about the last time you bought something, if you're an Apple fan, the last time you bought a MacBook or an iPad or whatever your favorite brand is, did you think twice? Did you do 100 bits of research trying to find, is there one that's slightly better? No, you didn't, because you just immediately thought, I have trust with these people. I know what this is going to be like. I have some idea of what the experience is like, and I'm just going to go for it. So trust, actually, once you have trust, it's like the biggest, like speed up and turbo boost. So Think Productive, my company, one of our corporate values is trust and kindness are our rocket fuel. And we really think about trust in that way, that it's something that speeds up. But of course, that's not free. So you do have to start out by being very deliberate when somebody new joins the team, or if you're new in the team, how are you going to build that culture to really set the scene? I remember there was one incident, which is probably more about integrity than trust, but I think they're very linked, where we were working in my business with a supplier and they'd invoiced us for some work they'd done, and they'd actually under invoiced. And we very quickly phoned them up and we said, no, you need to add in, I think it was some travel expenses and another day of prep or something, whatever it was. And they were absolutely like gobsmacked, astonished that we hadn't just done the invoice. And I was like, no, like that's how we work. That's how we want you to work, right? But it's also like, we're not doing that just because it's fluffy, nicey. It's like, if we over invoice next month, we want you to pick us up on that too. So it's like, I think you have to sometimes have some of those stories where you really earn it, and those moments where you could be very tempted to just say, well, that's what they've invoiced for, I'll do that. But you have to really operate, I think, with that high integrity to earn that trust along the way. So yeah, I mean, it does take time, but I do think it's worth it because of what it brings you further down the line and what it continues to pay off in terms of, the extra productivity, happiness, retention, all the good stuff that comes out of having trust and psychological safety in how you work.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And one of our colleagues who's now been with us for, I think, over 3, maybe even 4 years, she said it's like having a really good boyfriend, in her case, when you've had a bad one.
Yeah.
And you don't quite trust it. So the new boyfriend is saying all the right things, but you're still not quite trusting that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So yeah, but you can also see it when it does happen, can't you? And you're suddenly having completely different conversations because when they make a mistake, people are sticking their hands up and saying, hang on, I've just got that wrong. And you can see the penny drop. It's fantastic.
Yeah, you can. And I think, I mean, that boyfriend analogy is really interesting because, like personal relationships like that are probably the biggest marker of this, but actually our work relationships, some of that happens in the nervous system. So if you're used to a pattern of being bullied, if you're used to a pattern of being, having people be uncivil to you, then when someone acts with kindness, you do have this slight defense mechanism. And so I do think, for those of us who are trying to build cultures with kindness at the center of it, you've got to be really wary of the patterns that someone's bringing in, or like, where do they start from, and probably, demonstrate that all the more, and keep repeating that message over and over again till you're sick of hearing it. And when you're sick of hearing it, they're probably just getting the message.
Yeah. No, you're so right. You're so right. And that brings me on to the second bit. So I reread the book again just recently in preparation for this. And one of the things I really liked was it's how mistakes are dealt with. And that's a real tell, isn't it, on the kindness. Is there anything more you want to sort of say about that?
Yeah, well, I had a boss a few years ago who had this. Well, probably longer now. You can tell losing the hair. But yeah, one of my early bosses was someone who had this amazing phrase, and it was, "I don't care if you screw up." She often used to say it with an F instead. I don't care if you screw up as long as you own up and clear up. And I think that really set the tone for how I think about mistakes. And I think mistakes should be seen as different from negligence, right? So
Yes.
negligence is a deliberate, act or malicious act, or where you've really just not kept your eye on the ball. But mistakes are often things where you're trying stuff out, you're figuring how things might work, and you're going to sometimes get those things wrong. And I think it's really important if you want innovation in your team, you've got to celebrate the mistakes. And you've got to look at mistakes as data and learning rather than something that is primarily around attaching blame. So if you start from that basis, that people are generally good, people are trying to do good stuff, sometimes they'll screw it up. If you start from that place, then often you can use that as a more objective data point rather than a kind of subjective attacking point. And I think that's something that is very hard to do. And even I find it myself, like sometimes if I'm giving someone feedback or we're discussing something that's not gone well, even though my intention is not to attach blame to that person, my intention is not to make that person feel bad. We do naturally just, struggle to get that feedback. We do struggle to not feel bad in those moments. So I think you've got to just really think about how you deliver some of those messages and really kind of that's where my definition of kindness is truth and grace.
Yeah.
That's where the grace needs to come in with a big, thick trowel and you lay it on really thick.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think having conversations like that, I think there's always a time delay. So what people hear in the moment, as you say, despite perhaps all
Yeah,
your best efforts, but what often happens is the next day they'll come back in and say, right, that conversation we had, I get it, I see it, and I'm over the emotion now, and I want to make this better or whatever it is. Yeah. So no, I
yeah, for
totally
sure.
agree. Totally agree. Another thing I really, really liked is being kind in the way that the person wants you to be kind.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten the phrase, kind how they want to be treated. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's treat people the way they want to be treated.
Yes.
And then the other little phrase I use in the book is kind on both sides, which is
Yes.
about your impact matching your intent. And often we have kind thoughts, but like, does it actually translate into something that not only do we think is kind as an action, but that they think is kind when they receive that action?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a really important thing.
And that takes a lot, doesn't it, to understand the person that you're talking to, particularly if it's a difficult conversation, and understand what kind would be to them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think for me that's often the purest form of kindness, right? And there are exceptions to it. So there's going to be times when the impact doesn't match the intent, and actually the reason is that the person isn't quite ready for that act of kindness or isn't quite ready to hear that truth. So that
Yeah.
it's not always a case that what you try and put out into the world will be amazingly received. But I do think it's the best. For me, that's the best data point we have. It's the best measure we have for are we truly kind, is does that impact match the intent? And again, I think that comes down to, different people like different things. For some people in a team, the idea that when it's their birthday, everyone's going out for drinks, there's a big cake, there's a big fuss, is totally the most brilliant thing. The attention's on me. I had this friend at university, and when it was his birthday, his name was Gareth, and he would have a 4-day festival of Gareth, and it was like it's all about me. And it was like we used to call it the Festival of Gareth. But for me, I mean, it's actually my birthday next week. Like, there's nothing organized. Like, I'm a bit more introverted. I don't like those kind of that spotlight being on me in that way. So so different people in the team, you're going to deal with that same issue of birthdays, that same thing of doing something kind to celebrate someone's birthday in very, very different ways. And I think the only way to to really reconcile that is that a bit like trust, kindness takes some time to get right. We have to figure out who people are, what people like, what people's preferences are, and then over time, what's gonna make that impact match that intent in a much better way.
Yeah. And we use quite a lot of psychometric testing here of various varieties, and we did our senior leadership team, which was 5 of us, I think, at the time, did an activity, and kind of very long story short, caring became one of our biggest attributes. But
Yeah.
then when you broke it down, caring to all 5 of us meant something completely different.
Right.
And so, caring for the people-focused people is, are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help type thing? Caring for the task-focused person is, right, let's get a decision made and get on with it so everyone's clear about what they're doing. And care for the process person was examining how we're going to do it so everyone knows what their contribution is.
Yeah. Right.
So although
Yeah.
we all agreed on the attribute, we did not agree. We all came to it in a very different way.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that tells us is that language and particular
Yes.
words are, like there is a lot of nuance around that, and people do take different things. And so I think someone who works at Think Productive, Matt Cowdery, he's known as the questions king. And what he's very good at is in a group setting, he's the person who'll say, what did you mean by that? What actually are we doing? What's the actual action that we're taking? Like, what's the specific? And just bringing us back to really kind of nailing down definitions. And I think if you don't have someone in your team that does that, be that person. Brené Brown says, clear is kind, unclear is
Yes.
unkind. And I
Yes.
think there's something about just really getting people to be specific and getting people clear on stuff that is a really generous act of leadership, actually. And one of those things that often when we're rushing around, it feels like the teachery move. It feels like the annoying, the annoying pedantic person to actually ask those questions or do that thing. But actually, often getting people to pin down specifics will actually eliminate so much unnecessary work and inefficiency and really kind of make sure that people are on the same page. So I think it's one of those really underrated, important skills, actually, is like asking those good questions and, really pinning people down to stuff.
Yeah, and so actually you've preempted my final thing that I picked up,
Mm,
which I got from when I was part of the focus group and did the original read of the draft. Clear is kind, and that I took with me from that day, and I've tried, but then it's what clarity is for each individual again, as
yeah,
you say.
yeah,
It's then asking those questions. And I think what do you need from me is a really powerful question for a manager to ask the team.
yeah.
What do you need? What is clarity to you?
I talk about it as there's 3 V's when it comes to clarity, which I talk about in the book. So and particularly these are true of being a leader, but they're also true of being a team member as well. So you need vision. What's the thing that you're all trying to achieve? What are you trying to head towards? Is that really famous story of JFK going around the NASA sort of tour and bumps into this cleaner. And he says, "Oh, what do you do here?" And the cleaner says, "I help put a man on the moon." And so you need that vision, like everybody driving towards the same thing. You also need values. So what's the rules of engagement? How are we going to do stuff? Is it just sales at all cost, or is there some ethics involved? Is there some kind of way that we want to work, way that we want to operate? How do we pin that stuff down? So values. And then for each person in the team, what's the value that you need them to bring? And that's the thing I think sometimes for certain roles can be really easy to measure. For a salesperson, it's very easy to measure, money in, money out. But for a lot of people's roles, it's much more difficult to measure what does that value actually look like. So it might not be financial, but just some kind of quantification of what do we want this role to look like and what does it look like if it's successful. And I think once you have those 3 V's in place, the vision, values, and then value, then it's much easier to be clear. I think that's a really good starting point. And again, coming back to the sort of personal relationships thing, you know, I interviewed a couple of clinical psychologists for this book, where I was mainly talking about listening skills. But one of the things I got from that was the idea that if you're the person in a listening partnership, and you're adding clarity, and you're adding boundaries, and you're adding some structure, you're actually the person who's creating calm. So that was quite an interesting one for me, in that it sort of reframed our role as a leader, in that when you're a leader, again, some of those things that feel like they're adding extra structure, they're actually an act of service, because they just produce calm for everybody else. They produce so much clarity for everybody else that everybody else's nerves, you know, sort of cool down a little bit, and then everyone's able to do their own work in a much better way. So again, I think it's, you know, that idea of clarity can sometimes be seen as being overly pedantic, but you'll be thanked. Like, I often find that there's if I'm doing a keynote, often I'm doing a keynote as part of someone's away day.
Yeah.
And there's often a moment in an away day where someone will put up their hand really gingerly and say, I don't know what that means, or what are we actually trying to do? We haven't really been specific about that. And then their hand goes up in such a sort of, sort of reluctant way, and they just seem so nervous asking the question. And then 5 people around them go, oh, thank goodness you asked that. Because I was thinking the same thing. And I think it happens so often in groups where we don't just take that time to be really specific. And so again, often if you're the one who is brave enough to be the first to ask it, to put your hand up, you'll generally find that you're not alone when you do that.
No, you're absolutely. I love that, creating calm. That's got me thinking about all sorts of things. So you're right. The clearer, the more people understand what needs to be achieved, how they're going to be held accountable, what support there is, all of those things. Creating calm. I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. I'm going to stop recording, if I may.
Sure.
How do I do that? I click that.